how do we even know what to trust anymore?
Perfect question.
What a question. How do we even, I mean, how many people are thinking about that question? How do I know what to trust anymore? And I love what she responded with. She said, it would be better I would be better to your listeners and your readers to deal with specifics than to deal with big generalizations. In terms of operations, the specificity is important. And it of course resonated with me because I think so often when we talk about trust, we need to be specific. If someone asks whether they can trust me, I hope the response to someone else would say is with what?
Yep.
You know, it's that trust is we treat it as such a just a broad macro topic, but I loved her response. The specificity is important. Let's get this wild conversation going. And welcome to the Wild Conversation, where human being and human doing converge, reshaping the world of leadership, culture, and performance. And so, Sabbath, tell me about our guest today.
Today, we get to have a wild conversation with Chris Shaffer, who's the former director of learning and insights at Microsoft and our newest member to the Wild team, which we are so stoked about. Chris has been a leader in creating strong learning cultures focused on the individual. His core strength is seeing the individual within a system, speaking of systems, and connecting them to a larger purpose. Chris has the ability to create a deep understanding of organizational needs in order to integrate now here with us at Wild, our Wild Trust platform, into the moments that matter to the people, processes, and tools they use. He leverages data insights from the Wild Trust Index and our toolkit to create alignment between people, their teams, and their organization. Chris is creating environments that empower people to learn about themselves and others, which creates a platform for purpose-driven innovation and performance. And as he likes to say, a learning culture is an engaged culture. Chris, thank you for being with us today. We're going to start off with a game of wild cards, and none of us are unfamiliar with this, but we're not going to overthink it. Just a reminder to all of us, we're going to dive deep quickly in with our first response. We have a deck of 50 wild cards that have a different question on each card that allows teams and organizations and just groups of people. We've done it around the dinner table. Rob, I know you've done this with people that you've had over to dinner to just have a deep conversation. So I pulled out 10. So I'll go first. Chris, you'll follow, and Rob, you'll wrap us up. I usually have a reason for picking a number, but I'm just going to go with 2 today. What do you feel called to sacrifice today that may serve others? This is a great question. I just had a moment with my daughter this morning. I had to sacrifice my own desire for a specific response from her. I needed to remember what was important in the moment was to connect with her as she left for school, not for her to respond exactly how I wanted to. So that's what comes to mind. Connect in the moment and sacrifice my own desire for a certain outcome. All right, Chris, pick a number.
Well, today, the day we're recording this, is my third month anniversary, my third month of working for Wild. So let's go with number 3.
I love that. Okay, 1, 2, 3. What did you experience in the last 24 hours that may have been a moment that mattered?
I had a lot of time by myself yesterday. I was feeling kind of bored and wishing my wife were there. She was busy with something. And it was a good reminder to me that taking time for myself to just pause and rest and reflect is important. It's an important piece of the whole, as opposed to always doing, always serving, always helping other people, being productive. So it was another great reminder that's a piece of my life that I need to get, more comfortable with.
Appreciate that reminder. Thank you. Rob, pick a number.
4.
What character virtue in you is a strength, but if overdone, becomes problematic for you?
conviction. When it comes to certain things, I bring a lot of conviction. I have been told in the past, I've actually been told by sometimes that I actually intimidated people, which always surprised me because I don't see myself as someone who would be received that way. And so I've had to be very thoughtful about just making sure I want to continue to express conviction in the things that matter to me, but also I don't want to scare people away, and so making sure that people understand how much I care about them as people as I bring my convictions to certain topics. And so I kind of see that as a two-edged thing in my life that's really important, but I also need to be thoughtful about it. So thanks for asking.
That's good.
Wow.
Right.
So that's a pretty good start. I always appreciate those questions, even though they are always challenging. And I actually get a little nervous every time I think, which card's she gonna pick? Which card is Sabbath gonna pick? And so, Chris, it is such a pleasure and just such a moment of joy for to have you here on the Wild Conversation podcast. And I was thinking about the nature of our relationship. And it's a reminder, I think, to me and to everyone out there is to pay attention over the long haul. Because you meet under certain circumstances and then maintaining an awareness that your paths may cross in ways that are very different than what you expected, that may not surprise you completely. And so the fact that we met over coffee through a mutual friend who said I remember him saying we need to meet each other. And I think both of us had a deep sense that there's something there. And so now to be able to work together has been really amazing. Even in these first just few months, just incredible. So grateful for that. And I know I love it the way Sabbath introduced your portfolio of work and also just who you are. And I wondered if, as we open up this conversation, this is to try to wrap yourself up in a statement, but if you had to describe the portfolio of experiences you've had and skills that you've utilized over the years, how would you describe that?
Well, you gave me this question before we launched into this, so I had a little bit of time to think about it, and it's a really, really hard thing to try because there have been so many experiences, so many things that have shaped who I am and how I work, what I'm capable of, all the learning that's happened. So I have a small list of things, and I'll go through it quickly. But I want to open with musician. I've played the piano and keyboards since I was 3 years old, so virtually my entire life. Why do I share that on a podcast where we're talking about business stuff? Well, being a musician, as you know, shapes the way your brain works and the way that you process things. When I think about phrasing and structure of communication, pacing, tone, all of that relates to music. I have over 20 years of television production experience. I know about lighting, I know about transitions and flow because I've directed it, I've edited, I've produced. And so when I think about speaking or giving presentations or even running events, facilitation, those skills all have transferred over. I've done challenge course. I've facilitated, low ropes and high ropes team challenge course stuff, which is about creating environments that are safe for people to experiment and learn within.
Hmm.
I've done, had reorgs done to me poorly, and I've been in charge of reorganizing teams and thinking about how to do that thoughtfully and caringly for the people as far as change management is concerned. A lot of change management skills came out of having to reorganize teams over the years. I built the brand as the guy who fixed broken teams. So I've experienced taking dysfunctional teams that were really struggling and bringing them back to health. How did I do that? I'll tell you my secret if you promise never to tell anybody. I actually just cared about the people a little bit, focused on the human being and not all the focus on the doing. I got involved in the employee survey at Microsoft, which started to build my data analysis skills and how to write good questions. And then in my last role, where I was running the learning and development team, I learned a lot about learning. I don't have any formal training in learning, but I surrounded myself with people with expertise. And so I built the skill of understanding how people learn, how the brain works, and what learning even is. And so that would be a small capture of the portfolio of experiences and the specific skills that came out of each of those things.
Hmm. When you and you spent, was it 35 years?
Almost 35 years,
Almost
yeah, at
35 years
Microsoft.
at Microsoft. And I think it's a very unique journey. I relate to pieces of that because I spent 21 years in one organization where there were other things occurring outside of that organization as well that were shaping me. Um, how do you make sense out of that 35 years and those different places where you've had a chance to gain these kinds of experiences and insert yourself into these environments as a part of these different teams? What's the grand story there when you put it all together?
Well, the story for me was, I mean, I would say it was a journey of learning. And over the years, people would ask me, how long do you think you're going to stay here?
Hmm.
And and my answer from year one all the way to the end was the same. And me leaving Microsoft was not my choice. It was just a business decision. But my answer was, listen, there are so many opportunities to learn and really smart people, people that know more than me, that I can learn from, and challenges to be solved, that's what drove me. And I said, if I ever felt like I was out of opportunities to learn or I didn't have anything else to learn, then I would leave. And that will never happen in anybody's context, I believe. And certainly, I got to the point where I knew some things about areas that other people didn't, and I could start being that mentor and coach to them. And so the opportunity to not only continue to learn myself, but help other people learn. So this two-way thing, I
Hmm.
would say, is the arc of the story. And
Okay.
I would say that the the biggest accomplishment, or if I look back on sort of the result of all of that, is really the people being able to invest in and help the people learn and grow, whether that was one-on-one through the many, many coaching and mentoring relationships I had over the years, or more broadly at scale for the teams and organizations that I led personally and impacted the people under me, as well as working with other leaders and helping them help their people so that it scaled even broader than the organizations that I ran.
If you think about Microsoft, and both of us you spent those years inside. I spent the years working with different pieces of the organization and also just have deep family connections. It's difficult to live anywhere near Redmond, Washington without having that, but I have certainly deep and historic connections in that were extremely formative. When I look back, Microsoft, if I were to think about the corporations that had a major impact on me, even though I didn't work there full time, I immediately would think of Microsoft for about a dozen ways. Um, what is it about the work there? Maybe thinking so that people who understand the culture and the system that is Microsoft, and with as much specificity as you can. What is it about the work at Microsoft specifically over the years that was most compelling and important to you as you look at that almost 35 years?
Yeah, and again, the I discovered early on that I am more passionate about people than I am about technology.
Hmm.
And so what was important to me was, yes, I have a computer science degree. I wrote code, I did innovation in the technology space early in my career. But there were plenty of people who had the technology chops to innovate at that level for the company.
Hmm.
And yet their level of innovation was limited. They didn't see it this way, but their level of innovation was limited by, core skills. We'll call them core skills, not soft skill, the people skills. And so by focusing on that, I could take people who are already pretty successful in their level of innovation technologically and amplify that level of innovation. When two really smart people actually start working together to innovate, they can exponentially innovate in the technology space. And so by focusing on the people, I was able to, in a small way, contribute to amplifying the technological impact of the work that they were doing. And so that is sort of the key kind of insight. And I think certainly under Satya's leadership over the last 10 years, from the top and the growth mindset, right? We're not know-it-alls, we're learn-it-alls. That whole shift has accelerated. And I think the value of the company increasing by 10x in that time period is not a coincidence. It's not an accident that focus on bringing humanity to the company has resulted in that kind of increase.
One of the ways that Microsoft was formative for me was the early adoption, and this would have been decades ago. Because when people think of Microsoft, they tend to think of, software and technology and so on that has changed the world, quite frankly. What they may not know is that Microsoft early on, especially when it came to developing leader capacity, had to figure out, and people think this is a new story, but how to transition people that were just killing it on the development side and transition those people into leaders. And so, like in the wild ecosystem, so often, whether it's a software developer or someone who's writing code, transitioning to actually managing people. And as you said, the softer side, which we always describe, right, is the harder side, right? It's like the hard side of work. Whether it's that or whether it's a plumber transitioning to a leadership role, or someone who's working in the farming equipment industry, or you name it, the security industry. But as soon as we go from those technical skills and then transitioning to leadership, one thing that was so powerful about Microsoft was its adoption early on to the most innovative research that, quite frankly, changed the nature of the way that corporate America and even corporations around the world were thinking about developing leader capacity. And so one of those early adoptions was that people learn from experiences, and a lot of times that those experiences are really difficult. So our last guest, Dr. Paul Yost on the podcast, who had done a lot of work at Microsoft and been there as well, we were talking about from his writing the necessity, for example, of job misfits. So most of the research on job performance is related to job fit, the necessity for a person fitting the job in the organization. And he was talking about, which is a powerful concept, of the necessity for job misfit, because misfit is where learning occurs. So it's just, I would want our listeners just hear that Microsoft was innovating in ways that were connecting the operational side of the business to that, depending on how you describe it, that harder, softer side of human beings who actually are doing the work very, very early on. And it was really formative in my own career and development and the work that we do. But one thing I wanted to ask you is, can you tell us a little bit about the learning culture research? And I bet there's pathways into what I just described that you had just wrapped up before you moved on from Microsoft.
Yeah, and there's an interesting sort of arc through kind of our journey in trying to unpack and understand and figure out what was going on with learning culture. We started out with some anecdotal information in a sense that people just didn't have enough time to learn. So we started to measure that. We started to ask about that. And really three main barriers to learning came out. Time, I don't have time, I don't have the resources, and my manager is a barrier. And if you think about the time, he's like, okay, the manager and the time are connected. So we dug into that deeply for like 5 years and peeled the layers of the onion on time, thinking that time was the issue. And what we discovered was that time is actually a symptom. And really, when people say they don't have enough time, it's an excuse. We all have more time than we give ourselves credit for. There's so much that's out of our control that's true. So we focus on that, we go into victim mode, and we say, I don't have any time. Well, you don't have any control over that time, but you do have control over this time, and you're abdicating that control with that sort of an attitude. And so we actually worked on and raised the awareness and tried to give protected time, set aside a day, a month, for learning for the team, or Fridays, for a couple hours. And lots of teams did different things. And the time score did go up a little bit, and the manager score did go up again, but it wasn't like making a real big difference. And so we asked a different question, which was, my organization prioritizes learning as critical to business success. And that was super low. Like, no, that wasn't it. So now we started getting at what the root cause was. And in the final research I did, we looked at, so I have to share this story. In the book Switch by Chip and Dan Heath, it's a book about change management. It's a good book on change management. But there's a story and a concept they share in there that inspired my approach to data analysis at Microsoft, which was this notion of bright spots or positive outliers. So often when we look at data, we look at what's red, we look at what's low, and we say, hey, we got to fix that. And don't mishear me in what I share here, because if something is fundamentally broken, we should go fix that thing. But it's rare that we look at the highest scores, what's going well, and try to understand that so we can capture it and replicate it. And they shared a powerful story about doing that. And I said, I can do that with the data about learning culture, with engineer leaders and leadership and culture, all that stuff. So we looked at the organizations who had improved their learning scores the most and had organizational continuity. In other words, the people were the same year over year. So the change in data wasn't just because it was a different set of people answering the questions. And I took the top orgs in the company on learning culture and I went and studied them. And I figured out what characterized how they operate, what was behind them achieving these high scores. And what I discovered is were three foundational elements that were present in every single one of the organizations. And the first and foremost, and really the main thing, was the mindset of the leader, how they thought about learning. If they thought learning was a task, if they thought learning was training, then it wasn't going to happen. But they understood that learning is a lasting change in behavior through experiences, which might be a training, but it, more often is on the job, to your point earlier from Dr. Yost. And so the mindset drove everything. It drove how the leader showed up, how they reacted, whether they were a learner themselves. Time was the second element, but it wasn't just that it was protected, it was prioritized, which flows out of the leadership mindset of the person running the organization. And then the third element was reinforcement, modeling, listening, coaching, talking about learning, some form of reinforcement. And when those three things were present, learning culture thrived. And the people, and by the way, there was a bunch of other stuff like just employee engagement, satisfaction of employees, et cetera. Those were also higher. So this was foundational to understanding what was, how to build a critical learning culture.
So just in a few words, name each of those three one more time for those that are listening, because I know they're saying, like, bring it back.
Yeah. Mindset.
Yep.
Time, protected and prioritized, and reinforcement.
Excellent. Okay, so let's transition now. And this is such a natural flow. As you exited your long journey at Microsoft, what was compelling about the Wild Leaders' vision and mission? What it is that this organization was up to?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is that I was running a learning and development organization, but really what I was doing was focused on manager excellence and leadership and culture. So it wasn't my job. Wild Leaders is all about leaders and leadership and the culture of the organizations. And so the alignment with my passion, 100%, right? It wasn't just doing that work, but you're responsible for something else. The other thing is that Wild is focused on creating other-oriented or sacrificial leaders. That's really important to me. That kind of orientation is resonates with me. I believe that's the best way to approach leadership, and that's what Wild is focused on. I would be remiss if I didn't say that Wild is committed to being data-informed, data being at the center of all the work that's done. And I know it's surprising because I don't talk about data very much so far in our little conversation here, but data is super important to me, and it is to Wild as well. Yeah. And then really the heart, I would say the heart of the organization about helping and serving leaders and organizations is, really touched me. And the fact that my experience, I saw from the outside, I believed from the outside, and now I have experienced that Wild practices what we preach on ourselves. We use the tools, we use the approach. We're not perfect. We learn as we go. And that kind of an environment really is one I wanted to be a part of.
You mentioned data and its importance. And there's a story that I tell about my early inspiration for what Wild Leaders now does in terms of assessment. And that story is related to the video game Halo. And I know your son is there, and the story is that I was back in the day before gaming platforms. I started playing Halo before we were doing LAN parties back there. What was called, for those of you that don't know, local area network parties, where we would connect all of our boxes together with Ethernet cables, our Xboxes, and we could play this game. And there was one particular map, because you would play in these contained maps, that I was trying to solve, and I couldn't figure it out. And it was a 7-story map. And when the game started, all of the players and their avatars, as they're called, would start at the very top of this map. And it was 7 stories, but it had a hole that went from the top story, the roof of this building, all the way down through the center. It's kind of a space age setting, all the way down. So this hole goes straight down to the very bottom floor, the first floor. But you started on the 7th floor. And so I'm in this space of my own development, understanding and soaking up some of the best research. We were doing work in aerospace on understanding the journey and the developmental journey of leaders. And so this particular map, what would happen when it would start, and I always describe, it was me and all these probably 12 to 16-year-olds, is that I would watch this happen. They would all, when the game began, they'd be on the 7th floor and they'd all run for the hole and they would drop down to the bottom. And I noticed that behavior, but I didn't really know what was going on. And then my nephew said, "Hey, go to the Halo website." This is when things had gone online. And he said, "There's so much data about the game you're playing. I mean, all of this stuff that you could soak up." And so what I found out is when I went to that particular map, what I realized was that the space age weapon that was being used most effectively on that particular map was this rocket launcher. But you didn't start with it, you had to find it. And it always started on the same place on the map. It always was in the same place. And I always ask people, like, so where was the rocket launcher? Because remember the behavior I had seen where people are running for this hole and they're dropping into this hole that went to the bottom. And everybody's like, at the bottom of the hole. And they were absolutely right. So I saw the data about where, like, my own performance. I saw what this rocket launcher was being used most effectively on this specific map. And then what did I do the next time I played? Of course, I raced to the hole. I dropped to the bottom. I picked up the rocket launcher and I watched my scores go up by 25%. And I had this, because I'm an integrator, this connective tissue between, like, I'm making these connections between, oh my goodness, think about the amount of data that's in the development of a person that relates to them understanding themselves. And then when shared, starts to build trust and performance at all kinds of different levels when it's shared together. And so I was having this, this is the way I tell this story, is that I realized, like, I want to help people see the space age rocket launchers in their lives and career based on the best research that's out there. And I told that story the other day to a mutual friend of ours. And he said something that had never occurred to me, because when people started to think about gaming platforms and their application to learning, what they originally thought, that I was like, this is not what I was thinking. And it's not, I thought this was a little off the mark, was they thought about it more in terms of kind of creating a way for people to practice, like put them. So I wasn't thinking about the avatar part, where it's like, I get to walk around in a pretend office environment, interact with different people. What I was compelled by was the data. And this is what this friend of ours said. He said, you saw the power of the data in learning. That's what compelled you. And I said, bingo, that there is something about the data that is necessary as an ignition point for understanding other things, that actually, as we would say at Wild, that the intervention, the change process begins, it probably begins before this, but at the very least, it begins the moment someone sees the data, because without that, they have no way to scaffold where they are in comparison to others. And so, um, as you've been on the front lines already with our assessment of trust, we have the Wild Trust Index, and Chris, you have the most, the most recent firsthand experience of another place where we assess, gather data, and you see people's, like, their eyes open up. What are you seeing and learning as you use this tool with our clients? And how does data relate to that whole learning thing you just described?
Well, it's super fun and a privilege to be able to have an assessment of something as I'll say vulnerable as trust, because if an organization is not doing great or has areas of opportunity, that can be, you got to have you even have to have trust in us to be able to say, let's take a look at that together, let's open it up. And the one of the things, the first thing is that everybody has areas of strength. We measure trust across so many dimensions that there's nobody is low in everything. Also, nobody is high in everything. So there are areas of strength to highlight, which is, first of all, great to encourage leaders to say, here are some things that are going really, really well. And these areas of strength are ones to be leveraged, to sort of stand on and to take advantage of, because this is what you have going for you. And that even makes me think back on the bright spot, positive outlier thing. Even within the various dimensions, you've got some positive outliers to say these are good things. Let's make sure we don't lose sight of those. And then, of course, everybody also, no matter how strong an organization, no matter how good trust is going, there are areas of it where there are opportunities. But the thing that's most helpful, it's not just, oh, you have some strengths and there's some areas for opportunities. It's the specificity of it. It's the detailed nature, which makes me think of your opening comment on the podcast, where some culture surveys ask about trust, and they might ask one or two questions. And is it going well or not? Do you trust your leaders? Do you trust your team? And that's going to give you, is there a pulse, right? Is there, maybe even the strength of the pulse. But like, if there's a problem, if there's an issue, it's not very specific. We break up trust into the personal level, the intrapersonal issues with how an individual thinks about trust and being trustworthy. And then we look at the team level, interpersonal, how you and I together can trust each other in those dynamics. And that's a really, that's a dynamic place right there. And then systemically at the organizational level. So at all three of those levels, and with each one of those, there's 11 dimensions. And so we can unpack for an organization and diagnose specifically areas of opportunity. And I liken it to, if I said, you have a pulse or you don't, it's like hooking up a 12 lead EKG to somebody and saying, we're going to get at the deep heart of trust with your organization, which valve, which area of the heart is worth some further exploration together. And so the value of that for organizations, and even through doing it, through measuring it this way, it's really helping them define and understand what is trust, because it's a fairly, amorphous concept until you actually break it down the way we do to say, here are the specific things that feed into trust with other people.
That is so good. That 12 lead example is really fascinating every time I hear you talk about that, because I went through a bit of scare where I was like, I know a lot of people have. I'm not the only person who's had these scary moments where you're like, am I having heart issues? And I wasn't really interested in the maybe story. I really wanted to know, like, what is actually going on with my heart, or does it have nothing to do with my heart? Is it anxiety? And so those, having been hooked up to a 12 lead, I know that, there's multiple ways to assess. And I wanted to know, like, I don't want the maybe. I want to know as clearly as possible, where do I have issues or not? And for those of you that don't know, that Wild Trust Index, it's not single, it's not one dimension. It focuses on three different areas. A personal level of trust, because we know that there are certain drivers that increase my own capacity to be a trustworthy person as a part of a team, and that awareness starts there. A team level of trust, and so assessing based on the key drivers of trust at the team level, which is so critical. And then also there are critical variables at the organization level that are drivers of trust as well. And so it allows you to see more specifically what is actually going on here. Is there anything when it comes to those three areas, Chris, that the personal level, the team level, and the organizational level, at any one of those, are there a couple of examples you could give us of sort of eye-opening moments where people have said, "Oh, I didn't realize that was occurring"?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind when you think about the three areas is that so far, pretty much every organization has scored the highest at the personal level.
Hmm.
And I think there's two ways to think about that. One is to highlight the fact that you're not going to build trust with your team and with other people if that trust and that level of sort of strength isn't at your personal level. So it's a great foundation to build on. But the other way to think about it is that your team and your organization level can only be as strong as however high you are personally. So not everybody has scored the same level of strength, but their highest score has been on the personal level, which just reinforces the fact that it has to start with you. It has to start with each person. And then each of the other elements is only going to be as good as that or not as good because it's more complex. You throw in the factor of other people and it gets harder. So that's an interesting observation sort of across the entire work that we've done there. A specific area that really pops that's been clear from the beginning is this connection between job clarity and development plans. So these are two areas, and there's a huge correlation between those either being high together or low together. And it makes common sense. If I don't have clarity around my job and what I'm doing, how could I possibly have a good development plan for that unclear job? So as I say it, it's like, well, duh. But the data just proves that those two things are together. So if you want to have everyone with a good development plan to be growing and building their skills, there has to be clarity in their job. And the data, shows that. And the leaders can then take action on that to work on both of those things together.
Yeah, that is so good. So good. Chris, I'm overjoyed and just I have unending gratitude that to be on this team with you and to be able to serve organizations the way we are together. And so grateful for you and for this conversation. I know that there is so much here. So Sabbath.
Yeah, I'm excited because I know that this is just the beginning of the conversations that we'll have together and that we can share as we move through this process together. Chris, we want the people listening to know how they can connect with you on a few levels. So one, if they want to connect with you about investing in the Wild Trust Index for their team or organization, how do they connect with you there? And then tell them where they can find you in the best way just to connect with you and your work.
Yeah, for sure. If you want to find out more about or participate in the Wild Trust Index, you can email contact@wildleaders.org and we'll get back to you and we'll hook you up. If you want to get a hold of me, you can either email me at chris.shaffer@wildleaders.org. Last name is Shaffer. There's no C in my last name, no matter how bad you want to put one there. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well. My moniker there is Chris SH.
Perfect. And we have one last wild question. Chris, are you in a season of accepting yourself or changing yourself?
Well, given that I am in a new role at a new organization, even though I'm bringing quite a bit of experience and skills to it, there's so much that I'm still learning and have to learn. I'm in a huge season of change right now.
It is such an honor to be on mission with you, Chris. Dr. McKenna, share a final thought about measuring and building trust as we close out.
And I hope people will feel a sense of that importance of assessment of getting there, not just for the sake of, not treating people like numbers, but the process of seeing where you are, that it gives you a sense of where you could be and where you could go in terms of building trust at the next level. And so we are so excited to support you if you're in that phase. And Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you guys. It's been a huge honor to not only be in the conversation here, but be asked to be on the team and be a part of what you're doing. So I'm super blessed.
Thank you for listening to this Wild Conversation podcast. Building trust in your business starts with being able to measure it so that you can create a pathway for change. Our Wild Trust Index measures the drivers of trust at the personal, team, and organizational level. Visit wildleaders.org/wild-trust-index to download a sample report and begin measuring trust. Seize your wild moment today.